Anyway, our talk is on BAU and moving beyond BAU. So BAU, for those of you who aren't aware of the acronym, is business as usual. When I think about BAU, I think it's boring and very uninspiring. When people say, oh yeah, we just do BAU here, I just think, oh God, here we go again. But what's the risk of business as usual? Particularly in our space that we're working in, basically conservation, landscape management. The risk is pretty much extinction for a lot of species and a lot of landscapes. Because business as usual does nothing to change, does nothing to innovate. And there's a whole bunch of academic people in this room who are doing awesome work. Academia does awesome work, and it takes so long to trickle down to the practitioners. And along the way, there's so many barriers to that really good work getting uptaken and put on the ground. I've been lucky enough in the past, since 2015, a lot of my work is in the urban space, and in Western Sydney there's about 44,000 hectares that is changing from peri-urban landscape, small-scale farms to what's the biggest urban expansion in Australia's history in such a short period of time. 15 years, 44,000 hectares is going from farmlands, small villages to metropolis. So 2015, a whole group of us were working together to stop the business as usual stormwater management, which we knew if this place was going to turn into a metropolis, every single waterway in the South Creek catchment, which is basically the biggest creek catchment in the Sydney metro area, would be smashed to pieces. So 5, 6, 7 years later of a whole bunch of collaborative teams, ecologists, flood modelers, hydrogeologists, geologists, soil tech people, urban designers, urban architects, urban landscapes, city planners, and all the other people involved, fought really, really hard to develop catchment-specific flow and quality controls for the South Creek catchment, which will ensure that no new development can degrade the waterways in that catchment any more than they are. There's also 2,500 hectares of riparian revegetation that is planned for this precinct. And along the way, it was just beating the team involved by planners, politicians, developers getting some academics from other unis to try and discredit the science. So we're under attack, full stop, business case after business case, and finally at the start of this year, they got announced that a new development control plan came out for that Aerotropolis region, which implemented all the stormwater controls and water quality stuff. That is now in place as a planning policy, which is an awesome outcome, and it took so long and broke a lot of people's spirits. But at the end of the day, BAU is bloody hard to stop because of there's just the barriers that you get to. Next slide, please. Or clicker or something. So pretty much, if you're old enough in this room to remember Kodak, they had no idea. They didn't even acknowledge what was happening in their space. And so Kodak pretty much went extinct very quickly. So BAU, under the Kodak model, means that all of those threatened species or critically endangered species will be dead, extinct, wiped off the face of this continent in not too long. Next slide, please. So if you're in the local state or feds or probably some of the NGOs you guys work with, you are very, very aware of the MERI, the monitoring, the evaluation, the reporting, and the improvement. Now, we all monitor, and everyone loves to evaluate. And then everyone doesn't really like to write a report, because most of the time as a consultant, you probably know that your client, particularly if they're local government people, aren't going to read it. And the improvement never, ever happens. if it happens, it's a very, very surprising outcome for people like me who do recommendations to lots of clients often. And then if you get a win, you're actually surprised. So all projects, and in the merry budgets, there is actually some budget put away for improving the next round of whatever works occurs. However, that rarely happens. Next slide, please. And I'm being critical because we are criticising business as usual, and what's the risk? So in our experience, to move beyond business as usual is a massive risk. It's a risk basically to the money that people are going to put into things, to people's jobs, perceived jobs, but also just a threat to people thinking, holy moly, what the hell are these people talking about? How we've been doing this for so long. Why should we change this? And what's the evidence to make things better? And so in a lot of agencies that are involved in conservation or land management, there's just these little piecemeal bits that go on. There's no one really, in our experience, at an organisational level, that just takes the bull by the horns and says, you know what, stuff this little piecemeal rubbish, let's just go all in, smash it and get it done and get a good outcome. So much politics is involved in the world that I work in, be it at a small council level where there's 3 or 4 wards in a council, and funding and projects have to be equitable across the LGA, because one councillor will get, their knickers in a knot because that ward over there got a bunch of funding that actually could make a difference in that funding cycle. And then as you guys know, everyone here knows, incremental change takes a long time. I think there's some research out there that says it's about 30 years from an idea to actual what happens on the ground. Something like that. Could have changed since I read, but something like that. A long time. However, a lot of these species that we're talking about, or we're interested in, they don't have 30 years. There's 5 years, 10 years, max. 50 years if we're lucky for koalas. So all these little tiny changes, there's such a lag in what we're trying to deal with and how fast the pace of change moves. So to really protect a lot of the critters in Australia that are critically endangered, got to move quicker. Next slide, please. I'm sure everyone in this room who has come across probably local government or state government people, critical again, because this is what happens. The phrase is, we've always done it like that, so why would I want to change? A good example for me is in the water quality monitoring world, aquatic ecology world. We have some clients that they have done the same thing for 20 years. But why do we just done it? We just do it. We have a budget. You're like, yeah, but you can do so much more with that budget. Just change it up. Do a bit of modification. Yeah, but we've always done it like that. Well, what's the question you're trying to answer? I don't know, but we've always just done that monitoring. Like, okay, so can we do this better? Oh, nah, it's okay. We've always done it. If we don't spend it this year, we won't get it next year. So let's just keep on going. So that's one of Mick's phrases. That is a bin fire of an attitude. Because if you've ever seen a skip bin on fire, you know that it's just a mess and it ends in disaster. It takes a long time to burn, but it ends in just a big blob of plasticky mess on the road at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So, moving beyond BAU, and Mick's going to talk about our busting through the BAU thing in, the nest box world and that type of thing, but everyone is going to watch what you're doing. If you are trying to do other than BAU, be a bit innovative, push a few boundaries, and a lot of people will be very quickly to criticise you. Like, if you're going to do something that's beyond business as usual, have a thick skin. Know your stuff, back yourself with research, and back yourself in general. They're doing anything different in the space of conservation particularly. It requires a willingness to invest. Mick and I used to have nearly mortgage-free lives. We don't anymore. And you've got to be prepared to fail. And that's a big thing with moving beyond that BAU. People, particularly people that handle the money and the funds, they don't want to see failure. And so if you're not wanting to see failure, you back the same old stuff because you know it might work a little bit. But to really get incremental, big, or not incremental, but big changes, you've got to back yourself, back a project, back your people. If it doesn't work, you learn from it. And you go, right, it didn't work because of this, let's change that. And there's a lot of egos in this world, especially in ecology. Oh my God, there's some people who, they're the expert in the world in some rare bat or some rare mollusk on a rock shelf somewhere on the south coast. And you try to talk to them about doing something different, not a chance. But you're going to get kicked a lot if you're going to try to push the boundaries. So you've got to be resilient, like I said before. Don't have an ego, be resilient, take on feedback. And yeah, disrupting like BAU or the status quo is actually a massive challenge to people and a challenge to yourself as well. So that's kind of the I don't know, philosophical side of moving beyond the business as usual part of what we do. And I'm going to give you to Mick, who's going to tell you about what we've done and how we've moved through this kind of business as usual.
All right, so presentation title is What's the Risk? What's the risk of a joint presentation? I've got 2.5 minutes, 10 slides. I'll have the next one, please. So we're going to go fast. A few stats there. If you want to follow up, you can read that. The key point is tree hollows in Australia take about 100 years minimum to form. These little trees planted there, they're not going to see a tree hollow for 100 years. So we looked at nest boxes and what's happening in business as usual. Yeah, next one, thanks. Oh, this is Australia. So we are world leaders. That was talked about yesterday. People think people are out on chainsaws. It's not how we do it here. We're better than that. We're more efficient. We do it like that. We just clear land like no one else. Next one. So that's business as usual. Timber boxes last about 8 to 10 years. They fall out of the trees, but it takes 100 years for a hollow to form. So all these grant-funded projects that are putting up nest boxes, they get a lot of common species, very rarely species of conservation concern, and this is why we wanted to address these problems. Next, thanks. Prototyping stage, we 3D printed. We went back to the drawing board because my supervisor, when I did my honours, he said, I don't want to do anything with nest boxes because everyone's tinkered around the edges and no one's made any meaningful change. So unless you're going back and looking at the key issues and starting from scratch and, pardon the pun, thinking outside of that box, don't bother. So these led to a next slide. We got industrial designers in. We took years developing, trialling. We got to this point. This is manufacturing. Next one, thanks. And we came up with thermally stable nest boxes that have much more natural shapes, that last up to 50 years in the field, and that are all configured based on scientific literature for the target species. Next one, thanks. And they work. So that's a Crefts glider going into a nest box 4 days after that was installed. Next one. Eastern Rosellas. These boxes have been up about 2 weeks before a pair moved in and probably have chicks in there now. Next one, thanks. So this is our learnings, I guess. Challenging business as usual. You need to think big. But to think big and to change things, you need to get back to the very root of what the problem is and not just be stuck in this one line of thinking. You need people to support you. Find someone that actually has influence and is willing to support you, because it's really critical, because everyone out there, when you're trying to change something and do something different, people will line up to tell you that you're going to fail and that your idea is no good. Which, yeah, take feedback, anyone that's got good feedback, take it and learn, but don't take shit from people, because there are plenty that want to offer it. And back your knowledge. Like, if you know something can work and something needs changing, back yourself to do it. And that's, I think we've got one left. Working on some new products now for some of those species, as well as a couple of other things. But I'll wrap it up there. We're over. Thank you.